In 1990, I was a second-year photojournalism student, and I was working on a project that was a little bit dangerous. I experienced the first time in my life when I got shot at while making pictures. And you're probably thinking, oh, he's going to show me a bunch of these images from that moment. But the truth is, I didn't shoot a single photograph during that moment. In fact, I think I blacked out for about 15 or 20 seconds, because when I came to, I was down behind a car, behind the engine block, basically hiding with a woman and two small kids. And I made a realization at that moment that I was not going to be a photojournalist. What I was interested in was not that peak moment of shooting. What I realized I was interested in was how something like that could have possibly gone on in our culture. How many systems were involved? You had race, socioeconomic standing, history, tradition, family, law enforcement, the court system, etc. What I realized was I was interested in the buildup to the shooting and what came after. And so I made a decision at that moment that I was going to be a documentary photographer and not a photojournalist. And over the years, especially my early years in photojournalism, I was really fixated on some things that weren't helpful in the long run. You go through the equipment phase where you think everything is associated with your equipment, and then you realize it has nothing to do with your equipment, and you get sidetracked. So there's a couple of things that I think are incredibly helpful if you're going to be a documentary photographer that are unrelated to photography on the surface, but they're critical for understanding who you are, what you're doing, and what it means to be a documentary photographer. Number one is read. You should be reading every single day. There are no excuses for this. And when I say read, I don't mean online, and I don't mean social media, and I don't mean anything short form. What I mean is long form, book length material. If you need to read on a digital reader, that's fine. I travel a lot. Sometimes I take a digital reader because it's a lot easier than a paper book. But here's the reason. It's no longer enough to be a good photographer. If I review portfolios at a portfolio review event and someone walks in with good imagery, who cares? There's probably 50 people at that same event that have good imagery. And so you have to be more than a photographer. You have to expand your knowledge base. And I'm talking really expand it. You should be reading anything you can get your hands on. History of the umbrella? Sure, why not? I'm reading a book about the history of the mosquito right now. It's fascinating. Anything you get your hands on, fiction, nonfiction, historical fiction, biographies, whatever it is, educate yourself on as broad a topics as possible. Number two, you need to be writing every day. I was fortunate about 20 years ago, I was in France at a photojournalism event, and a very famous old photographer came over to me and pulled me aside and said, look, photography is great, but make sure you write everything down. Writing is essential. I get people sending me things on a regular basis, sort of out of the blue, which is totally fine. And oftentimes these images come with no explanation, no copy, no story, no nothing. And my first response is always, where's the copy? Where's the story? As a viewer, I need to understand what's happening. So writing is an essential tool. Historically, photographers are not known as writers. In fact, many are known as terrible writers, even though I think they're actually good. I think most people can write relatively well, but it's a habit, it's a practice that you have to do. So you should be reading and writing every single day. And there's always an excuse not to do this. I've heard all of them, and I don't believe in any of them. Number three, you have to learn to speak about your work. And the rare times when I review portfolios now, I often end up not looking at any of the photographs that people are trying to show me, because when they sit down in front of me, I ask them why they are there, why they are showing me this work, and what it means to be creative in society. And most of the time, oddly enough, people do not have an answer, and they don't know how to speak about their work. So for example, let's say that you decide to go to Syria and make photographs. And I'm just pulling Syria out of the blue here. This is not based in any kind of fact or relevancy. Let's say that you go to Syria and you come and you show me work, and I ask you why you're in Syria, and you go, I don't know, it just seemed like a place to go, and there was a lot of action there. That's not interesting to me. There's plenty of people out there doing that kind of work. But if I said to you, look, why are you in Syria? And you had an understanding of the theater, the history, and you said, well, I see Syria as a linchpin to Iran and Iraq and the whole region. Now I'm intrigued. Now I'm going to say, really tell me more. And again, we're not talking about photographs. Your photographs are probably good. There's probably hundreds of people out there that are shooting in Syria, for example, that might have decent photographs. But of those people whose work is going to make the most impact or have the most life to it, etc., I think you really have to know how to speak about it. And you have to have an elevator pitch. When someone says, oh, you're a photographer, what kind of work do you do? You have to have an under 30-second, concise elevator pitch as to who you are and what you're doing. Otherwise, you will go nowhere, trust me. Okay, number four is you have to do your research. A lot of times I'll look at photographers, they'll send me images and they'll say, what do you think about these pictures? And I'll say, oh, this reminds me of someone who did the same project 20 years ago. Do you know so-and-so in this body of work? Nope, never heard of them. Never bothered to look. When you get into the higher levels of photography, you have to understand what has been done before. And that does not exclude you from doing the same story or the same project, but you've got to add your own personal touches and twist. And to do that, you have to know what's done before. For some reason, over the past like 20 years, I've seen the amount of research go down with photographers doing projects. I would say there's almost an aversion to doing research, almost as if people are in some weird way slighted by the fact that they have to go look and see what other people have done. It is essential. If you get to the higher levels of photography and you drop a portfolio in front of someone and they go, hey, this looks, so-and-so did this story 5 years ago, and you go, I don't know, never heard of them, done. Like, you're out. You're not going to be in the conversation. The fifth one is very fun. The last point I want to make is you should be experimenting on a daily basis, which means failing, trying new things, not what you've seen already done, not what you've seen online. This is when you're left alone with your own thoughts and you come up with some crazy idea and your wife or your spouse or your partner goes, what are you talking about? That's never going to work. It's never going to fly. That is reason enough right there to do it. And the second part of this, it's a tandem answer, which is you should be collaborating. You should be working with people from other disciplines, whether it's writers, designers, illustrators, people that work for the city, people that work for the government, other people who have a similar interest. And you should also look for people who are more talented than you. Take it from me, I do that all the time. I look for people who are interesting, talented, and I think to myself, how could I integrate my work with theirs? Over the past 10 years, my collaborations have been the most important projects that I've done, bar none, including the latest AG23 zine that I'm doing. That is a collaboration with a bunch of other people, and it is very challenging and time-consuming and expensive, but it's well worth it because I will end up being a part of something that's much greater than just me. So those 5 things, I would say read every day for sure, write every day, learn to speak about your work, do your research, and experiment and collaborate. And if you can handle those things and make great pictures, you are on your way.